Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com with another 101 video. This time it's on the concept of labor. So labor 101, because you always hear people in politics saying, well, we need to fight for the rights of labor and the working class. What does this mean? What are the arguments around this, and what is the discussion that needs to be had? So when people talk about labor, what they're really talking about, basically, some people, what they'll do is they'll parse people's roles in the production cycle into three sort of categories. There's land, meaning landlords, people who own property and rent out that property for use to build things, live there, etc. Capital, those are people with resources that they can either use to procure like machinery, rent land, whatnot, the resources to kind of make sure that the project happens, this production occurs. Okay, and labor, the people who actually physically act to produce the good or service. Okay, now oftentimes, so there's basically the labor, land, and capital. Okay, but usually capital is the entrepreneur in the sense that they take ownership of the project, which means they only get paid after everything else gets paid. So what happens, when you apply basic economic thinking, the idea is basically more risk, more reward. So when you rent land, when you rent a piece of property from someone, you have to pay them regardless of whether you make money or not. When you hire someone to work for you, you got to pay them whether you make money or not. So capital, on the other hand, only makes money if they make money. Okay, in a sort of very theoretical sense. I mean, there's more detail you can go into, and it gets more complicated, but this is just the basic idea of it. So what happens is that if I'm that capitalist, if I'm that entrepreneur, I rent a factory, or I rent the facility for a factory. I buy the machinery for a factory. I got to pay for those machines. I got to pay the rent on that property. And then all the people I have working in the factory got to get paid regardless. So then what happens is that when we sell whatever the end good is, the money is really going to go to all of them first. So because then they have less risk, because they don't necessarily have a stake in the final sale, theoretically, they get less because they get paid earlier and they're taking on less risk. And so the reward for the capitalist to take on the additional risk, wait the longer period of time to get paid, they're going to get a larger share of that final sale, theoretically. The problem is, other people don't look at it this way. Other people just look at it what's called the labor theory of value, where basically something should be worth basically if there's a profit, that means labor didn't get paid enough, in a sense. So if there's extra money left over after everything's said and done, then you didn't pay the workers enough. That's essentially the way they look at it. When there's all sorts of other considerations to take into consideration. But there are legitimate concerns, because over history, what happens is that there is what's called an asymmetry. Asymmetry means an inequality, but an asymmetry of power. So in the sense that if labor has fairly poor working conditions, or has a hard time getting by with the wages they have, they have very little power to negotiate with the owner of the company to sit there and say, hey, can you pay me more? So what's happened, especially if you are lower skilled labor, because you're more replaceable in a sense, because there's a lot of other people who are unskilled. Skilled labor, basically, the more skilled you are, the more bargaining power you have in labor relations, and the ability to ask for like higher income, etc. So then what happens over time is that unskilled labor, while they have very little bargaining power alone, they organize because they have much more bargaining power together, because basically, while they may be replaceable, they're not all replaceable at the same time. So this is where the whole idea of strikes come in. So they sit there and say, hey, you know what? If you don't at least come to the table and negotiate with us, we're all just going to go on strike and not work at the same time. And this is a valuable thing about having the right to organize and whatnot, because it allows people with imbalance of power to correct those imbalances of power, to sit there and have a negotiation, to sit there and have a conversation. What's happened over time is that people then got government involved, and government sort of started creating rules that favor one side or the other. And for every rule that favors one side, there may be another rule that favors the other side. And it's become further away from trying to actually have people sit down at a negotiation, more towards how can we use government to sort of, tilt things in my favor, and this kind of pushes a lot of these aspects of labor away, because it's not just about wages, it's also about working conditions, flexibility, work hours, all sorts of different things. And again, every place you work is different and has different needs and different considerations and whatnot. So trying to create one size fits all policy can sometimes be problematic for businesses or for labor. So one of the things to get at is, unions are an organization that people are free to organize, no matter, like any other kind of organization. But like any organization, when it's given political favor by government, can oftentimes get away from its original mission of representing the members of its group. So, you would want, if people were more free to choose, which, in some places the world is moving more towards freedom to be able to choose whether you're in a union or part of a different union. But the benefit of that is, if you have unions compete, just like anything else, it holds them accountable. Also makes them figure out how to provide you more with less. So instead of because on top of being taxed, your income being taxed, on top of your income having to pay for your cost of living, be paying union dues on top of it can be quite a detriment to a lot of laborers' income. So having unions compete against each other can force them to kind of really reassess what do they need to spend money on in order to provide you with the maximum value, to maximize what you get out of it, and provide you with more benefits from the union, instead of always just saying, hey, you're going to pay us to just kind of basically just participate in this fight, which is oftentimes just gotten away from an actual negotiation to just basically two people trying to force each other through government. But there are, and this always surrounds conversations in terms like the words a living wage. What does a living wage mean? Oftentimes when people say living wage, they're looking at it at the moment now. They're saying, okay, there's these people who are laborers whose quality of life is below the median. And the median is a term that's usually used in political conversation. It's different than average, because when you have an average, it gets thrown off by the people who are at the very, very bottom and the people who are at the very, very top. These outliers screw up averages. But a median means there's as many people on top as there is below. Problem is, every time you improve things for people, and you give people the quality of life of the current median, you've just moved the median. By defining the conversation that way, the conversation never ends, because the median's always moving up. And so you can constantly say, well, there's all these people who are below the median. But when you take a look at sort of absolute quality, the absolute purchasing power of what people can buy with their wages, the absolute length of life, safety on the job, most of these metrics have improved over time. It's just basically the relative, but the relative will always be relative. So these are kind of the problems with the debate as it is. And oftentimes, the things that are actually, making it harder to get a quote-unquote living wage is oftentimes the very things that they're advocating for. More taxes, because more taxes end up taking more of your income. More taxes end up meaning that your employer may end up having to charge more for whatever they're selling. And that goes for other people's employers who sell things that you buy. So your cost of living goes up while your income goes down because of taxes. So you can force your employer to pay you more and more and more, but your income, your real wage, meaning what you can buy, will actually shrink because your costs are more and your income is less. But then your employer is not going to have a harder time staying in business. While if you do the opposite, you lower taxes, you'll keep more of your paycheck, your employer has more money to either pay you or survive as a business, so that way your job is safer and there's less pressure on you. Because what happens is as that crunch between as profit margins shrink, people try to get more out of the labor that they have. So someone who used to work get paid for 40 hours and do 40 hours worth of work is now expected to be paid 40 hours and do 60 hours worth of work. If not, they'll hire someone who will. So there becomes a lot more pressure and stress on the people who do work there, because everyone's trying to get a little bit more value out of every dollar they have, because everyone's seeing their dollars shrink because of the extra taxes, the cost of the extra regulations, all this stuff. So oftentimes the things that are actually oftentimes the interests of everybody are actually quite in line. As in everybody's interest to have less of your stuff taken away from you, to have less bureaucracy around you, whether you're labor, capital, or land. So hopefully you found this interesting. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great one. Enjoy.